The Library of Alexandria, the greatest mystery of the lost world. Imagine a place where thousands, perhaps even hundreds of thousands, of ancient texts were gathered under one roof. Scrolls containing the works of philosophers, mathematicians, physicians, astronomers, and travelers. Knowledge from civilizations that had already disappeared. Descriptions of lands that modern people might know only because someone once wrote about them. Now imagine that almost all of it is gone. There is no surviving catalog that tells us exactly what was inside. No complete description of the building has survived. And most importantly, nobody can say for certain how the famous Library of Alexandria disappeared. That is why, more than 2,000 years later, it remains one of the greatest mysteries of the ancient world. The story begins in Alexandria, a city founded by Alexander the Great in 331 BC. After his death, Egypt came under the rule of the Ptolemaic dynasty, and Alexandria quickly became one of the most important cultural centers of the Mediterranean. The Ptolemaic rulers wanted their city to become more than a wealthy capital. They wanted Alexandria to become the intellectual center of the known world, and the library was created as part of that ambition. But it is important to understand that the ancient Library of Alexandria was not simply a large room filled with shelves. It was associated with the Mouseion, an institution dedicated to the Muses, the goddesses traditionally connected with art and knowledge. Scholars lived and worked there. They studied mathematics, astronomy, medicine, literature, and philosophy. They debated ideas, performed calculations, compared manuscripts, and tried to understand the world around them. Some of the most influential scholars of the ancient world were connected with Alexandria. Euclid developed the foundations of geometry. Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the earth with remarkable accuracy for his time. Hero of Alexandria studied mechanics and designed extraordinary devices. Astronomers carefully observed the night sky and tried to understand the movements of the planets and stars. And all of this was happening more than 2,000 years ago. But where did the library get so many texts? Ancient accounts describe the determination of the Ptolemaic rulers to collect written works from across the known world. Ships arriving in Alexandria could be searched for books and scrolls. In some accounts, texts found aboard ships were taken temporarily so that copies could be made. Over time, these stories became almost legendary. But the basic idea fits what we know about the ambitions of the Ptolemies. They wanted Alexandria to possess an extraordinary collection of knowledge. Texts from different parts of the ancient world were brought together. Greek literature, Egyptian knowledge, works of mathematics and philosophy, medical writings, historical records, and many other forms of knowledge became part of Alexandria's intellectual world. And there is something especially interesting about what the scholars did with these texts. They did not simply store them. They studied and compared them. In the ancient world, manuscripts often existed in several different versions. Errors appeared during copying. Lines could be changed or lost. Different authors might preserve different versions of the same work. Alexandrian scholars compared manuscripts and tried to determine which versions were the most accurate. In a sense, they were performing something similar to scholarly editing long before modern publishing existed. But the more we learn about Alexandria, the more important the central question becomes. What actually happened to the library? The popular story is simple. The library burned in one enormous fire, and humanity lost much of the knowledge of the ancient world in a single catastrophe. It is a powerful story, but the historical reality is far more complicated. Ancient sources describe several fires, wars, political crises, and periods of destruction that affected Alexandria over many centuries. One of the best-known episodes occurred during the Alexandrian War, involving Julius Caesar in 48 BC. When Caesar's forces became involved in fighting in Alexandria, fires broke out near the harbor. Smoke and flames may have destroyed some books and scrolls stored in the area. But does that mean the entire library disappeared at that moment? No. This is where the story becomes much more interesting. There is no solid evidence for a single catastrophic event that destroyed the entire collection in one day. Instead, the evidence suggests that different scholarly institutions and collections may have survived for a considerable period after the fire. The real problem was that Alexandria experienced centuries of war, political instability, religious conflict, and economic change. Buildings were damaged, scholars left, collections could be scattered. Some texts may have been destroyed in fires, others simply stopped being copied. And if an ancient manuscript was no longer copied, it was eventually lost. Papyrus and other writing materials could not survive forever under ordinary conditions. For this reason, the library may not have disappeared in one dramatic moment. It may have declined gradually over generations. That explanation is far more complicated than the famous story of one enormous fire, but it may also be much closer to reality. There is another mystery. We do not even know exactly how many texts were held in the Library of Alexandria. Ancient sources give different numbers, ranging from tens of thousands to several 100,000 scrolls. But a scroll was not necessarily equivalent to a modern book. A single long work could require several scrolls. That means it is difficult to convert ancient numbers directly into the number of modern books. Even so, there is little doubt that the collection was enormous for its time, and somewhere among those lost texts may have been works that humanity will never read again. Imagine the writings of scholars whose names we do not even know, descriptions of cities that later disappeared, medical knowledge that may have been forgotten for centuries, astronomical observations made by people watching the same stars thousands of years before modern telescopes existed, historical accounts written by civilizations that left behind almost no other records, and literary works by authors whose names survive only because another ancient writer mentioned them. We usually say that the Library of Alexandria was burned, but perhaps the greater tragedy was not a single fire. It was the gradual disappearance of texts that were no longer being copied. That is what makes the story of Alexandria so important. It is not simply the story of a destroyed building. It is a story about how fragile human knowledge can be. Today we have enormous digital archives, libraries, servers, and databases. Information seems almost immortal compared with the ancient world. But history reminds us that it is not. Civilizations can disappear. Languages can be forgotten. Cities can be destroyed. And books can vanish forever if no one preserves them. Perhaps that is the most haunting part of the mystery of Alexandria. We cannot create a complete list of the works that were lost. We cannot know what discoveries ancient scholars might have made. We cannot read the thoughts of people who lived thousands of years ago and recorded their knowledge on fragile scrolls. Perhaps some of those lost works contained ideas that could have changed the development of science. Perhaps others were ordinary works that would have added only another small piece to our understanding of the past. But either way, the loss is enormous. Alexandria teaches us a simple lesson. History is not made only from what survived. Sometimes the most fascinating part of the past is hidden in what no longer exists. And somewhere beneath the modern city of Alexandria, among the archaeological layers of the ancient world, there may still be pieces of that lost story. Fragments of buildings, ancient inscriptions, pieces of papyrus, or perhaps even clues that could one day help researchers understand what really happened to one of the greatest centers of knowledge the ancient world had ever known. The Library of Alexandria disappeared, but its story survived for more than 2,000 years. And perhaps that means it was never completely lost. As long as we continue to search for ancient texts, study archaeological evidence, and ask questions about the past, Alexandria's story continues. And one question remains unanswered. How much of humanity's knowledge disappeared with those lost scrolls? And how many extraordinary discoveries will we never know existed?